Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Luigi's Mansion. In the last part we restored power to the mansion and got deeper into the third floor, ultimately finding ourselves the sealed room's interior, which gave us a new key to access one of the final rooms here on the second floor, so let's go clean up that area before we head back to the third floor proper. Now, because the sealed room itself is in effect optional, the two rooms down here are as well. But if you're trying to either A, catch all the boss fights, or B, get all the booze, which requires doing all the boss fights anyway, you're gonna want to come down here. The sitting room itself here starts off completely locked off. What you need to do is actually use the fire to light the candles next to the portrait to make the ghosts spawn in here. But you might as well also use the water on the plant to get the gold bar in the process as well. With that said, I'm going to take this moment to talk about something I've mentioned offhandedly a few times, the Hidden Mansion mode. We're going to unlock that upon beating the game. In effect, it's New Game Plus with sort of harder difficulty, at least here in the Western and Japanese GameCube releases. The main things about it are you take double damage, but the Poltergust also does 1.5 times damage. So as you can see in this footage I'm showing here of some of the early game boss fights, you can drain their health pretty quickly. I think gold rewards are also a little better. Here's me comparing my end of Area 1 scores. And that's about as far as the buck goes in the US and Japanese releases of the Hidden Mansion. But in the European and Australian versions, they made the Hidden Mansion a much more proper hard mode. For one thing, just about every room in the mansion before you turn the lights on is just generally darker. Plus, map-wise, the entire game has been mirrored left to right. If you've ever played the GameCube and Wii U releases of Twilight Princess, then went to play the Wii release, it's a similar disorienting feeling. Enemies in basically every single combat scenario have been increased in number, and later game ghosts like the ground pound guys can show up as early as, I think, Area 1 or 2. Boss fights were generally tweaked to be harder, like I think Chauncey's rocking horse attacks are larger and the balls come from the direction the screen's in rather than from where Chauncey sits. Bogmire's faster, Bulassus you ride the Poltergust in like I've mentioned. Boos have been made more agile and I think their HP counts are a little more varied as well. Notably, every single instance of a Speedy Spirit and Gold Mouse now drops one of the normal diamonds, which adds somewhere in the realms of about 45 million to the maximum endgame score. Due to that change in specific, those releases, and I think the 3DS release, have also increased the ranking requirements, as I mentioned before. To the point where in order to get the highest rank on those releases, I think you need to do the Hidden Mansion. And also, and I probably already mentioned this in some form of text earlier in the LP, that specific mode raises the amount of booze you need to finish the game from 40 to 45. So we can already finish the game, technically, in that regard. Hello there.
Do not try to wake me. Go away!
Next portrait ghost is Sue P, the dozing girl.
I won't wet the bed, I promise.
That's a pretty good hint on what we have to do to actively make her a fight. You gotta spray her with water, which is why there's also a water elemental in the previous room. After doing this enough, the boss fight properly starts. And now she's pissed. Now, one thing I would recommend doing before actively starting to attack her health bar is vacuum up the clown dolls in either of the two corners, because they can be an issue here. And despite how empty the floor is here because we're on the ceiling, the chandelier in the middle can be a surprising nuisance. And we can't reach that chest, so I guess we're just gonna leave for now. Notably, Sue P's bio is what was meant to be a short nap seems to have turned into eternal rest for sweet Sue P. Ugh, that's a bad way to go. I guess it was at least probably peaceful. So leaving the room for some reason makes it turn back around, and we can grab ourselves our diamond here, meaning that she is a completely optional boss, as mentioned prior. On most playthroughs, I come in here just to get all the booze and all the portrait ghosts. I don't care too much about the money, but for this playthrough in specific, of course, I'm going to get as much money as I can. Plus, we want to make sure we wanted that plant in the background for, I believe, another sapphire. So from here, our next duty is to head back upstairs, as the next door we can unlock is on the western half of the third floor. Now, something I'm not too sure about in future me, I'm wondering if you can do some math about this, is I've always been curious about whether or not the amount of booze that Bulassus counts for, 15, actually account for 15 different rooms across the mansion that don't have booze. It wouldn't surprise me, given the 2 bathrooms and the 2 washrooms on the first and second floor account for 4 on their own. The courtyard doesn't have one. The boneyard doesn't have one. The 3 main hallways don't have one. I'm curious, because it's honestly probably got to be closer than you'd think without putting proper thought into it. Whether or not it actually is, I guess we'll see when I get to the post-edit, but still, I can't help but wonder if that was their way of repairing a hole they realized when they wanted 50 full boos, but they didn't have 50 rooms they could put them into and make it feel right. It'd be an interesting balance idea either way. So with the key we got last part, we can now also enter this door, one of the 2 rooms we haven't explored yet here in the attic. Welcome to the armory. What's interesting about this room is that every suit of armor can be investigated, and when you do so, its helmet will open up. Some of them will have nothing, some of them will have money, but you especially want to be careful of every knight who's wielding a mace, because when you investigate them, their mace will fall, and that can hit you and do damage. I've actually taken a surprising amount of deaths over the years just plain forgetting about that. With that said, if they don't have money in them, or if they don't have anything in them, most of the knights with maces will at least spawn a ghost. In order to find every ghost in this room, you need to open up every suit of armor, as well as the chests in the background, and doing so will allow us to move on to the next room. It's kind of a funny way where this is probably one of the most 1v1 standard ghost fights you could do in the game, to the point where it comes across as kind of exploratory in a way, but it also makes it really laughably easy. I've actively never tried to investigate every single suit of armor in this room, though, while not taking care of any of the ghosts until I have them all available. I imagine, given the general shape of this room, that would get to be really annoying, because this is one of the curvier rooms to get around. With that said, I'm not the biggest fan of this room and the next room. Not for the rooms themselves, more for the boos involved. Because I think basically every new boo we're going to see moving forward is one that has upwards of 200 or 300 HP. And honestly, the last 10 boos are where I sometimes just decide to say screw it and go for just the minimum 40. Because depending on the movements, like I've mentioned, it just gets to be so tedious and not worth it feeling to go for the boos, so Also thinking about it, actually, I want to say, technically speaking, you can go into the next room the moment you first open the armory. But the chest that we get here gives us a key to a room in the basement that you're going to need to access anyway, so you should do this room still. Now, you've seen me use it a couple times, but there is something I do appreciate about this game. As much as it's annoying to say, like, backtrack to rooms like the sealed room for golden mice over and over again, or things like that, the game places mirrors plentifully enough where getting back to the foyer isn't that big of an issue in the case you're trying to get back to an earlier part of the game more quickly, like going to see Madame Clairvoyant or things like that. The 2 washrooms, the billiards room here, the sealed room and all that. There's always quick ways to get back there. Again, though, I do kind of wish either Luigi had a faster movement option you unlocked further in the game, or a one-way shortcut from an earlier area into a later area, just so you don't have to worry about trekking all the way through the mansion. Not that it takes long to begin with. I guess thinking about it, that might be why they ultimately went with the more stage-based designs in Luigi's Mansion 2 and 3, is people complaining about that specific instance. Because even though you might have to backtrack in some levels in like 2 and 3 to get the gemstones if you're trying to get 100% in those regards, you never need to go that far into them for that due to this smaller structure, so that is a pretty good benefit to that. Also, I remember being distinctly surprised while I was in that room chasing that boo, because the main event in there happens after you're in there for a few moments, and I'm honestly surprised chasing that boo wasn't long enough for that to happen. It usually is, which is the wild thing to me. With that said, let's head back there, and thus welcome to the ceramic studio. The first thing you're going to want to do in here is grab the ice elemental from this jar, and then just start vacuuming the jars until a cutscene eventually kicks in. It might take a second depending on the playthrough, really. Feels kind of random, honestly.
Oi, yo, with the mustache. Yeah, you. What do you think of me jar collection, then? Pretty amazing, don't you say? Well, we can't just let you look on for free now, can we? No, I think not. If you'd like to view me jars, you'd best challenge me first.
Fine with me.
It's on, then. See how many of me you can freeze that ice boil. If you freeze 7 of me, then you win. Right? But if you lose me, it's out the door with you. Righto, bring it on.
Next portrait ghost for us is Jarvis the Jar Collector. He loves his antique jars so much that he now lives in one. He can hardly contain himself. So this fight effectively works like whack-a-mole. He's going to randomly pop in and out of the jars in front of us, and you need to freeze him 7 times with the ice element. I think he pops up only 7 times, but Given the small scale of the area, Luigi's movement speed, and how fast you can spew out a pretty far distance of ice element, doing the 7 freezings for this is pretty easy as long as you reset yourself to the center every time. He does get faster as you go, but as you can tell, not exactly very difficult.
Game's over, mate. And the results are... You got 7 of me, boyo. I can't believe it. How could I lose? You made me face red for sure, mustache boy. Maybe you'd fancy getting stuffed into one of these here jars.
And thus the more traditional version of the boss fight begins. With that said, before you actively start trying to capture him, vacuum the jars that are shaking around the room first so you can just get them out of the field, as that way you can prevent certain attacks from hitting you during the actual capture phase. With that said, due to the shape of this room and especially the placement of the ice jar on the right side, this is a surprisingly difficult Big Pearl to get. I usually get him down to about like 40 and then I just get knocked off either due to one of the jars, the poison shroom shrinking me, or just the capture failing due to the movements I'm going through. Not a hard boss to fight, but definitely a hard, like, gold frame to grab. Which I guess is the big thing I should be more accurately stating. Basically, none of the bosses in this game are, by most metrics, hard outside of maybe Boolossus, albeit the damage of the final boss can also be pretty notable. It's getting the gold frames that can be a nightmare at times. With that said, we're not done in here yet. We still have 2 boos hiding to capture in here, so let's grab them. Now, something I'm not too certain of with boo behavior after you found them is what determines them just being out and about when you enter a room, whether or not the lights are on, or hiding in a piece of furniture within the room. I'm assuming it's probably time, distance walked from the room, or maybe just leaving the mansion outright between, like, chapters that can cause it, but it's definitely felt a little inconsistent over the years. As you can see with the boos that are hiding in here versus the one that just walked in here and then fled right before we took care of Jarvis. After we grab the boo that already fled from us, though, we're going to be done here in the attic for now. There's one other room up here, but we can't quite access that yet. Our next destination is actually going to be heading back down to the basement so we can take care of the new rooms down there now that we have a key for down there. In that regard, I can't help but wonder if maybe the reason the power outage exists as, like, a storyline beat is to sort of pad out Area 4 so it feels about equal to Area 3 in length. As if you didn't have the trek up to the 3rd floor, the power outage, then the trek down for Grimly and all that, it would be a noticeably short area compared to Area 3 in my head. Especially on a first run when you're a little more paranoid, you're searching items more frequently, and you're probably also especially looking for Mario's letter from the birdhouse in the courtyard on a first run. Which, by the way, I think, technically speaking, the toad in that room can shout out that that's there if you didn't grab it yet, and I just didn't showcase that. Now, the first of the 2 rooms we haven't explored down here yet is the pipe room, which is a pretty straightforward combat encounter. I think it's only against a couple of the grabbing ghosts. What is kind of annoying is that your area of movement is pretty limited. There's an area on the right that's lower elevation than the area on the left, and there's only a small bridge that takes you up it. But what you can do to avoid the enemies here pretty easily is just hide in the corner, face away, and wait for them to get too close, and then surprise them with your flashlight, which I don't think I've talked about that too much as a strategy, but that is grossly effective against most standard combat encounters in the game. Our next order of business is to grab the ice element, if you don't have it already, and freeze the water right here. Using that for a second, we'll just freeze it right up. And then we can go over here to investigate this valve. Pretty straightforward room, ultimately. This treasure chest contains the key to the room to our south, which, barring maybe the use of a boo, if there's a time I really recommend going to use a toad to save, if that's not before maybe Madame Clairvoyant, just due to the layout of that room, it's right now, as the portrait ghost that's in the room to our south is the hardest to get a gold rank on in the game in my eyes, just due to the room that he's in. With that said, we do have a boo to hunt in here, but the annoying thing about basically every boo in the basement now is that they're going to have 300 HP. And given the small scale of the rooms in the basement, partnered with the weird wraparound of the room next to the staircase, catching boos down here in the basement is a nightmare. Especially if one of them flees into a room you haven't been into yet, like this one's about to. Don't you dare, don't you dare, don't you dare, don't you dare! Oh, you did it. That's not the most annoying thing, but that means there's going to be potentially 2 300 HP boos roaming around here at the moment, and that's just not fun. With that said, welcome to effectively only the third to last room to explore here in the mansion. Welcome to the cold storage, which as its name would imply, is very cold to the point where the entire floor is ice physics, and there's icicles that'll fall if you get beneath them. Not my favorite to deal with. But the icicles are the main reason this portrait ghost is arguably the hardest to get a gold rank on.
Darn, I love the cold. I mean, I just plain love it.
Same, I love the cold. I hate the heat. I would rather be in a winter for most of the year than any kind of 90-degree summer. But that's just me. But since he loves the cold, we gotta warm him up with the campfire around him.
Hot! Oh, very hot! You! You're making it too hot! I'm gonna cook in this heat! I'm gonna melt! Did you light these fires? What were you thinking? People who start fires in this mansion had better be ready to pay the price. Now learn your lesson.
Only real portrait ghost here in the basement is Sir Weston the Chilly Climber. This strange fellow's icy abode may be the reason he hasn't warmed up to being a ghost. He's actively a little similar to Freeze Man from Battle Network 2 in that his main attack is shooting an ice wave at you, and he's got a giant ice barrier around him you need to melt with fire, which if you ever fail to capture, which you're likely to, he will reset, but only slightly, so a little bit of fire is needed. I barely got the gold rank there, goddamn. What makes him such a nightmare is the icicles that are falling can knock you down, of course, at any point in time. But keeping in mind the ice physics as well as which direction you need to hold an analog stick in to not break the capture is just really rough. Again, not a very hard fight individually, but getting a high rank on it is the real nightmare. Beating him, though, and sliding off screen allows us to get the key for the last room we haven't explored in the attic. Not many rooms left in the mansion to go. We're almost done here. Now, just for numerical clarity, the 50th of the 50 hidden boos we've been catching across the mansion is located in the room we just got a key for. If you clear out the basement, spade north to our north notwithstanding, and don't have 49 out of the 50 captured, you're missing one somewhere, maybe even more, and are probably going to need a comb throughout the mansion for him. With that said, there is a potential benefit to only having 48 before going in there, as minor of a note as it technically is. I'll go over that more in specific next time, though. Speaking of boos, though, counting the 2 we're working on already down here in the basement and the one upstairs in the attic, that brings us only up to 49. The 50th is seemingly missing. This ties into something I brought up earlier in the LP, where sometimes, especially here in the basement, boos, in my case the one in the breaker room especially, sometimes just resets itself into the room it spawns in, even if it fled into the hallway over here and beyond into these 2 rooms. It probably has to do with a timer or how many boos can be in a room at max, or maybe a distance thing, I don't know, but it happens to me damn near every playthrough for me. Also, while I was catching these last few boos, I was really hopeful Egad would say a very specific statement that he ultimately never did. It actually involves the next Portrait Ghost too, which is the weird thing. I'll read it out during that Portrait Ghost fight next time, as that feels like the most pressing time to do so. Also, the rare case where boos can flee into the breaker room is one of my least favorite events in the game, as the amount of barrels here to the side alone and how close they are makes the boo radar surprisingly ineffectual. It doesn't happen too often, but when it does, it sticks with you. With that said, with only 2 rooms we technically haven't explored, the room behind the spade door and the room that we got the key for a moment ago, as well as only after this boo 1 remaining, we're almost done. We're finishing this LP off next time. But we are going to go out of our way in the final part just to do a bit of a money grind, just to get as much as I can. But I do speed that up almost as fast as I can, really, just to make it go a little more smoothly. But we'll showcase that more specifically next time. Also, just to showcase it, because we now have enough boos to finish the game, 40 on the normal mode and 45 even in the Hidden Mansion mode in the PAL and European releases, if we head over to where King Boo sent us to the foyer earlier, he no longer does that. The boo power around here is too weak, thus the fastest way to get back upstairs is to just walk there. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 11, we're finishing off the game. See you guys then.